All right, so this is a continuation of chapter 3, but this is the second PowerPoint that would be in As You Learn, that is dealing with data visualization. And in this example, we're going to get into a little bit more practical sense about using or creating tables and other data visualization tools. So specifically, we're going to get started with tables and some design principles and how to put this together. So tables have a specific need. They should only be used when we're looking for specific numerical values. We need to make precise comparisons, and also when the values being displayed have different magnitudes. Okay, so previously we went over a lot of charting options, but in this case, if you have data that matches these several rules, know that tables are going to be more appropriate. So here's an example of a table. And in the previous lecture, we talked about data to ink ratio. So kind of keep that in mind. Right? What's really interesting here is that we can kind of see what all the data is. We can see that the first 6 months of a year are represented at the top. We have costs as a variable. We have revenue as a variable. And then we have total at the end. By the way, this is very common for a cross tabulation. What they usually mean by cross tabulation is that you have one variable at the top and you have a cross-reference variable on the left-hand side. And by cross-referencing, you get some kind of variable in the middle, or the value in the middle that cross-references costs for the second month of the year. That's a typical tabulation. All right. Here's another representation of that same table, but in a graphic form. I want to point out a couple things about this visualization. One of the key items is that we have a solid line used for costs, and we have a dotted line used for revenue. And as we track across this trend chart, right, or this is a line chart, shows a trend, and we can see that there's a differences between revenue and cost. And if this was in black and white, you could still tell the differences between the two values that are being represented. Now, some people would like to add a table at the bottom. The table is helpful at times when you want to get the overview, which is represented at the top. So the visualization is up here for the overview. And then if you want to look at something very, very specific, like here in the third month and the fourth month, we see some changes. And let's say that we wanted to look at those specific values, we can look at them in greater detail in the table below. So that's pretty helpful. So here's another table. We added another variable into the cross tabulation. Right? This includes head count. So this is the number of people that might have been working that particular month. Right? So thinking back to data to ink ratio, we want to apply some design principles when it comes to tables. One principle we want to look at is avoid vertical lines in a table unless they're absolutely necessary. Generally, horizontal lines are needed for separating column titles, but not necessarily the data itself. Right? So when we think of this, let's take a look at these particular design options. So in this first, well, let me ask the question this way. Which of these do you think is the better designed table? Well, we can start to break it down when we think of data to ink ratio. In design A, we can see that we have all the horizontal lines and vertical lines in place. And in addition to that, if you notice, these lines are very thick. However, those lines do not add to the representation of the data. And in some ways, it might make it more crowded to read the values that are represented inside the table. So we would consider design A to be a very poor design. Now, an improvement in design B, we can see that the thickness of those lines have been reduced which gives the numbers some breathing room so you can look at these numbers a little better, but still there's a very high data to ink ratio. Now in Design C, we've removed these horizontal lines that were here within the table. And so this is a major improvement from Design A and Design B. Right? The data is easy to read. Using Gestalt principles, we can see that the white space kind of fills in the differences. However, Design D is a more efficient and effective design, because now we have a comfortable way of reading every single number for the cross tabulation. And then also uses minimal data to ink ratios and only uses lines when it's appropriate. Now, there's something that's different about this table that we can now ascertain that is not the same in all of the others. One of them is the fact that we are looking at costs and revenues, which are two key elements in a typical business. And then we have this vertical line, or this horizontal line here, that shows that there is a mathematical operation that's happening with the values above it. This feature on this particular table is not present on any other tables, right? And this tells us that basically this number here, which is profits, should be revenues minus costs, right? And so it has a whole new meaning. So by minimizing the amount of ink and only putting them where they're informative, helps with representing our data tables. All right, so here's another example of a data table, and this uses color on the back end. It uses this pink, and it color bands every other column. Some people might find that acceptable because it helps with dealing cross tabulations when it might be difficult to be able to come across and then say, I want to know what this is and where does it apply. So it kind of helps with cross tabulation. It does increase the data to ink ratio, but it could be more helpful.